Good evening, everybody. Hello, hello. Thank you for joining. Hope everybody's having a fantastic day. Now, personally, this has been a little bit of a better day. I know last time on stream I was a little bit of a downer. That is not the day today has been, thankfully. Cat's already meowing in the background. You know, it is what it is. Of course, game plan here for today should be, at least for me personally, is an exciting one. Being able to talk about something I'm extremely knowledgeable in, with it being esports. Been around it for quite a long time. I'll get into all the weeds and my backstory one more time, as well as the insights that I have for everybody in sure enough due time here. But of course, as always, big thank you to all the new guild mates that have joined us over the last week. To think that it's just been a week since I've started doing live streams once again and making content. And it's been a slow and steady growth, but it is growth, and I'm absolutely thankful for everybody who's been a part of it. Just quickly setting up a few more things here in the background for my little chat in a few minutes. Alright, there we go. Basically got it all good to go. But without further ado, I think it's safe to say that we can get on with things. So first off, of course, I'm going to be talking a lot about esports today and my insights on it, but why do my insights actually mean anything? What's my credibility? I'm just a random VTuber. Why should you believe anything I say, basically? So in a past life, I guess as my fleshtuber self, as some would say, I've been doing esports since 2012, one way or another. With the release of StarCraft 2, I tried actually really hard to be a competitor. I tried really hard. I thought that I was really talented at it. Went to an MLG Orlando in Florida, and I got absolutely destroyed. It wasn't even close. I either got rushed down like it was nobody's business, or they toyed around with me and dropped a mothership on me, which, if anyone follows StarCraft 2, if the game's gone long enough to see a mothership, at least back then, they were trolling you. So yeah, I got quickly O2'd and kicked out of the tournament. I still enjoyed the atmosphere, though. Like, I still enjoyed being a part of the crowd. I still loved the production and the theatrics and cinematics that were being hosted by the event, and it did make me realize that this was something that I still wanted to get into and do, but maybe not necessarily as a competitor. So I tried, and I thought about it really hard. I seen the streams, but what did I want to do? And being inspired by, say, the MLG production crew or the GSL from Korea with Tasteless and Artosis, I got a lot of inspiration for the competitive esports side of things. And then I also took a lot of inspiration from Husky StarCraft, who had his more of a comedic, funny spin onto esports commentary. And liked that a lot, and decided to kind of start practicing. Just started off by casting my own games, and eventually started to offer to stream for local LANs, because streaming was definitely important, but a lot of the times these lands are very small, and they don't think about that at all, don't set aside any budget for that. So I really took advantage of the situation and used that opportunity to do tons and tons of tournament streams. Granted, for absolutely no pay, maybe a pizza slice or two, but I was still having fun. I enjoyed it. And the tournament organizers, they respected what I did, and I was very thankful for that. I did StarCraft 2, I then did League of Legends, and then Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, as well as Melee, took a took the majority of my attention in terms of streaming, especially a lot of it with the Smash Bros. Series with Smash Wii U, Melee, eventually Smash Ultimate. Was a tournament organizer as well as a streamer for a lot of local events, and even some that I had to travel for. I had the opportunity to do some pretty cool events, but eventually, I was mentioning I traveled around doing some of these events because I got paired up with a local tournament organizing company and started streaming their events. That is kind of where I saw my first pay in terms of esports. But that took at least 3 to 4 years of volunteering. I definitely don't recommend anybody going that long and as crazy as I did it. I look back at it and it's like, I'm very thankful that I had a very, very safe and comfortable living condition that allowed me to do so. Because if I had to stress extremely hard about like working full time, I would not have been able to pull off what I was pulling off. But it got me a bunch of experience nonetheless. And eventually that same company's CEO went on to found a collegiate esports team and an academic program locally here. And then in terms of esports in college, I eventually went to that college, of course, for the academic program. I was probably one of the first few people in the world to take esports in college/university, or as in a post-secondary kind of setting. And that was definitely interesting. I'll go on a little bit further about that later on in our conversation. But I took that. I also took the opportunity to become the broadcaster for the team itself. So, whatever was their highest priority match, I was streaming it that night. I worked there a long time until the writing was on the wall that the job just wasn't sustainable for a family man. Because I started that job when it was just my wife and I. And we did our very best, of course, to have time for each other, but it was still definitely very, very busy. However, once it got to the point where kids started to get involved, I can really tell that like it was just taking me personally away from them a lot more than I wanted. And the compensation, to say the least, didn't quite match the workload. So now I'm here. I've got a lot of insight on esports, a lot of things that kind of not behind closed doors, but maybe just aren't as thought about, that I want to put my 2 cents on, clear up uncertainties, and mainly just clear things up and let you know kind of what to expect as a competitor, a worker, a student, or if you happen to be a parent for someone who's interested in esports. That should take up the majority of our time here today. Of course, by all means, if anybody happens to have any questions at all during the stream, I'll gladly take it in whichever chat you happen to be a part of, and I'll get to it as soon as I can. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is from the player's mindset, because I feel like that's probably going to be the most popular thing that people are going to be interested in. Lots of people think that, oh, like, I could be playing video games professionally with these multi-million-dollar contracts, with these huge scholarships, or anything along those lines. No. Stop it. Those days are done. For the most part, anyway. Because, unfortunately, with esports as a whole, they tried so hard to be mainstream and legitimate that they've destroyed themselves in an unsustainable market. You'll see across esports in general that most of the headlines are "this got cut," a long time like legendary caster cut, broadcast staff cut, a lot of broadcast staff cut. Like coaches being cut, players forced to be taking like half or 3/4 of their salaries away and cut. Players just, or people just not getting paid in general. I mean, that's a meme in itself, unfortunately, in the esports community. You definitely have to be careful who you work with, but as a player, of course, if you're going into this with the mindset that you're going to be like making big money, that's likely not going to be the case. The only time I ever really see that anymore is if the player is also a streamer that manages to get their own brand deals. In that instance, they have a little bit of extra income and they're actually like in a really decent position, but it's not just from playing. And you're gonna hear me say that a lot because it's kind of important, to say the least. My biggest gripe personally dealing with esports players, because of course I was the esports broadcaster, right? My job is to basically sell the audience on the story of the matches that you are playing, why they're actually important in the first place, and why this is more than just gameplay on a screen with some random people playing a video game that happen to maybe get a little bit of change for them. So I need to sell the audience as to why you're important, why you're cool, why should they like you, why should they dislike you. And unfortunately, dealing with a lot of players, all they want to do is game. That is it. They think being the professional has everything to do with waking up at 1 in the afternoon and ordering their DoorDash to then queue up for a solo queue for about 8 hours, maybe scrim for about 4 or 5, go to bed at like 3 in the morning and rinse and repeat. And I don't care how good you get like that, you're still useless to me. Basically, as a organization or as a part of the broadcast. And especially if that player then goes up on stage, for example, and we want to interview them and they just keep saying no, they don't want a part of anything, they don't want a pre-game blurb, we're bugging them for scrim time. I have to be a fan of you first to then promote the fact that you should be, or people should be, fans of you. So if I don't like you because you're being very withheld and just want the game, then how am I supposed to promote you? Like, that is something that happened a ton of times back in the day, and it was painful. I mean, we did our best to get the job done, but it's definitely a little bit frustrating. So as the player, of course, having that extra ability to have a little bit of a social media presence, maybe have your own content, reach out more than just being good at a game. Because there's lots of people that are just good at the game, but that doesn't make anybody any money, that doesn't draw any viewers, and you're not going to be marketable, which is going to be your big negotiating point in your contracts. But a big question I would oftentimes see online is then, well, how do I go pro? What am I supposed to be doing right now to get myself out there? And like, your best opportunity now, because what we're seeing is majority of the relevant esports have themselves like your tier 1, your main league. If I were to use hockey as an example, like you have your NHL. But then tier 2 is where things get messy. like the road to pro is broken and messy, because tier 2 for the longest time was kind of just split amongst a bunch of like small tournaments. Nowadays that gets kind of taken over by college esports and college university esports. You'll hear me refer to it as collegiate probably for the most of the broadcast, but collegiate esports basically has replaced tier 2 for the majority of esports. And I'll explain why that's a good thing overall later on. But a lot of people, when they think about going pro, they'll get trapped in what I'll call the tier 3s, where they think that hopping into a team with some random organization that happens to maybe give them 50 to $100 is them going pro to then do some random weekly tournaments for a certain title. And that's not it. First off, like, next to nobody's actually looking there for talent. So if you're trying to go from those tournaments to tier 1, it's likely just not going to happen. You're going to burn yourself out, and you're not going to get anywhere. Yeah, unfortunately, joining Jimbo's squad and going to play in weekend like League of Legends or Overwatch tournaments just isn't going to cut it or what you're looking for. So the smartest thing that you would have to do here is go into collegiate, which does of course require you to be taking college or university courses. It's like, but Sylen, I don't want to go to school. I just want to focus on gaming, and that's where you're screwing up. Because these tier 3 tournaments that you can do with without any sort of college backing and just like, excuse the term, but no life it and just purely work on your gameplay, those don't get you anywhere anymore. Majority of the main scouts for top tier teams are either looking at social media numbers or college teams, from what I understand. If I were to put my money where my mouth is, in terms of like a study or something proving that, I don't have anything like that, but it definitely seems to be going that way based off of what I'm seeing on social media. You see a lot more of these collegiate teams putting up basically victory posts because their collegiate players are getting picked up by tier 1 teams and different things. Now, of course, every esport is different. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of fix. There may be some of those tier 3s that have good networking capabilities with the tier 1s, but that's a lot of luck. And just like trying to get into a sport professionally, it's going to be tough to get those kind of opportunities. Going to switch the scenery up a little bit here. Okay. I'll have a little bit of an exercise for us to kind of go through in a few moments to kind of explain something as well. But to continue along the collegiate side of things, so let's say that you are going to commit to going to college or university and pursue esports that way. It depends on how crazy are you trying to get. Assuming that you're trying to go pro in a certain esport, you're probably going to be looking to be recruited by one of these top of the line teams, like your Maryvilles, for example, for one of their titles. The things to keep in mind, though, however, is that going into these varsity teams, a lot of them take this just as seriously as you would a varsity football team, for example. You need to treat this as your life to get on to a team with notability. Your priorities are your school and your game. your matches, your practices, and whatnot, with no excuses. A lot of the ones, including the one that I had worked for, their whole thing was, there is no excuses. Even work is not an acceptable reason. So you have to take that into consideration, because if funds are something that's a problem for you, or if you're tight on funds or something along those lines, some varsity teams just aren't going to care. They're going to expect that you have that figured out, that you've saved up enough that you can fully commit to their program. So please do keep that in mind, while also trying to keep your grades up. The leagues that we'll talk about in a little bit, but like say your NECCs or your NACE or any of these other collegiate esports leagues that are out there, they have GPA minimums for you to achieve as well, that you have to hit, of course, and oftentimes the schools themselves will have a GPA requirement that's oftentimes higher or more restrictive than the leagues themselves. So again, like, your priorities have to be school, then your practices and games. You can't worry about work. They don't care about family time. You got a girlfriend or boyfriend, too bad. Your academics and your matches and your practices. I know for the one that I was at personally, there's also a line, I believe a lot of leagues and schools follow this as well, but if you fail any classes, you end up getting benched or completely cut. And that'll play into something a little bit later, but they want to heavily emphasize the varsity aspect to this, that this isn't just a place to go to dick around in school and just play games to improve your chances at a amateur or professional career in esports. So please do keep that in mind. I've seen teams get completely demolished because people get recruited, they think they're gonna have a fun old time, and then, oh, they failed a course, oh, they failed 2 courses. Well, guess what? Now you're stuck at that school without a scholarship, because you did not meet the requirements. And that hurts. It hurts the team, it hurts yourself, obviously, and it's kind of brutal. Mention scholarships, I'll get to that in, of course, just a second here. But when it comes to these big teams, when you apply, if you're not at least the top rank in any of the popular esports titles out there, you're not getting a call back. Even if you are in the top rank, a lot of times these colleges and universities now are looking for players that have actually had pro experience before. We are seeing that happen a lot more now, where people who were like really, really early pros are realizing that all these cuts are hurting them to the point where they maybe need to start thinking about a secondary career option. And then they go to collegiate and pick up the scholarships there. And these collegiate teams are absolutely feasting on this idea, and they are going to be profiting big time over the, I guess, the restriction. I don't want to say collapse, because the collapse of esports sounds like it's going away, and it's not. But it's definitely in a stage where we're seeing a lot of cuts. So they are absolutely crushing it right now in terms of getting professional or ex-professional talent to join their teams. So realize that that's kind of what you're fighting against if you've not had any professional experience in the past, which again makes this tough but not impossible. But having your own following and presence online is definitely going to help you move the needle for yourself. Now, when I refer to a big teams or a big varsity team, I'm referring to a school, a college, a university that has actual paid staff members, usually in this instance multiple, but say at least 3. And they have like your director, marketer, producer, and a maybe an assistant director or something, a mix of the three of the four of them. But even then, those big varsity teams don't necessarily have like paid coaches or anything either. A lot of those end up going to just really, really eager students, which I'll talk about a little bit more when I start talking about the worker side of things. But while they may have the biggest budgets in collegiate esports, they aren't actually as big as you may think, and there's still a lot of restrictions. Majority of these scholarships, for example, like they'll be pitching out full ride scholarships, and depending on where you go, like this is something you have to kind of keep in mind. A scholarship, depending on where you're going, may look better but actually be worse off for you. So say if you're going into the US, they say they will give you like a $10,000 scholarship a year or something like that. You got to keep in mind though that that's maybe a third of your tuition. So you still end up paying a ton going into that kind of situation. Meanwhile, if you were in Canada, for example, and you accepted a full ride of $2,000, then maybe you're only paying like another $1,000 more tops. So please do keep that in mind. And don't let the number itself kind of be the only thing that persuades you, because you have to keep the other factors in mind. But you usually get, of course, a decent scholarship. But one of the things that a lot of people are not going to like to hear, but is totally a thing, is depending on what game you play, does have a factor in how much you're getting. And I'll go over that in a little bit. And you've heard me say it a few times, of course, but your social media and content creation channels, if you have them, if you actually have something built up a little bit, have a small fan base for yourself already, that is your bargaining chip in scholarship negotiations. Even more so than I say, than your skill is. I would argue that majority of collegiate teams would probably take someone who's a little bit weaker if they already brought in a fan base. One of the things that does end up happening, though, with these big teams, too, because, I mean, they're not dumb. They see that they're a sought-after team that a lot of people want to apply to. And at the end of the day, the more people the esports team brings in is more enrollment dollars going to the college, which in theory means more enrollment dollars going towards athletics or student resources or whomever it may be that had brought them there. So they don't want to turn you away. And the biggest trap I feel like that you can fall into as a player in esports is being signed on to be a sub or in an academy roster. Now hear me out here. I'm going to use Rocket League as an example because it's a small team of 3. The school that I was personally at had Rocket League teams of like 4 to 5 people. And you think, well, okay, there was also a academy roster for this. So overall, they chose against having 3 teams to having like 2 or so, just to have the subs in there. And from a traditional esports aspect, this doesn't make sense, of course. If somebody's off their game, in theory, you can just sub somebody in mid-series and make it happen and see if they improve. But the problem that you'll hear very, very consistently from a lot of the players is when it comes to practice and game time, they don't like breaking their synergy, which is on the coach to really like drive home this point that if they're going to do this, they have to do it this specific way. Because, say for practices, for example, how do you do scrims with a team of 4 versus another team? So you're constantly putting the person who's kind of in the sub position in other spots with the other players and hoping that they jive well. So no matter what, the communication's always going to be just that little bit different. The timings are going to be that little bit more awkward, I suppose, compared to how it would normally be. And the players that are traditionally on the main roster will cause a big stink about that because they hate that. But there is a purpose to this, and it has absolutely nothing to do with gameplay. The academy teams kind of fall into this realm here too, where the subs and the academy rosters are pretty much only there for, of course, 2 things, which is 1, having the sub there or the academy team there means that there are people ready and waiting on campus for you to screw up your grades, fail, and they take your spot. So it's to light a fire under you. A lot of the times, I've very rarely seen the sub actually get put into a game unless the school or the team themselves actually force it, and you can tell the players aren't happy. A lot of the times the coaches aren't even happy either, but they just are there to keep their job. Just go along with it. Of course, the other reason, the only time where I've seen like a sub actually working as intended is if one of the main roster players actually does get ill right before a big match, where they have somebody ready and waiting on the roster that could hop in at a pretty like decent level, and even though there is a little bit of a synergy mismatch, the other player's completely out of commission anyway. So to do another NHL or hockey reference here, they basically are the substitute goalie that never actually gets to play unless the other goalie gets hurt. So they are there, but for the player that's actually in that position, that is a very, very brutal position to have to be in, because you have to ask yourself, yes, you are on a very, very strong team for probably a prestigious varsity team, but you get next to no exposure with the way it is. You're never in clips. You're never really posted on social media. Are you okay being in that position, being a part of that strong team, but not really getting much play time? Or are you willing to go to a lesser team, but be the star of it? It really depends on what your goals are, and I don't have the answer for you for that. That's going to be your own... it's going to be your own thinking that you have to kind of do in that situation. But of course, exact same team again, or exact same thing again, rather, for the academy rosters. They are only there praying on the day that a varsity player the varsity player from the main roster fails their grades and there's not enough subs to take the place immediately. I've only, maybe once, have I actually seen somebody get recruited into academy to then get promoted into varsity based off of purely improvement and merits and gameplay. Every other time I've seen it, it's been due to an academic need. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. While the chance for great success for these varsity teams is extremely high, you have to give a ton and put up with a lot of different practices to really push yourself there, but it is probably your best chance at actually being professional, because if you can handle that, you can easily handle professional. for the academy teams in particular, so a lot of these collegiate leagues, of course, only allow one team per school in their top division. So if you did happen to get recruited onto an academy roster, you'll have to note that you'll be playing into like secondary leagues where either it's the main league, but they have a smaller like subdivision that has a smaller prize pool. As much as esports teams will highlight about their communities and such, from what I've seen, academy teams basically don't exist in the side or in the sight of the varsity program as a whole. One thing that I constantly fought for back when I was in college esports was that if you were a team signed to us, you should get stream time. I don't care if you're Varsity Valorant or if you are Academy Omega Strikers. Yes, I understand certain titles are more popular, but if we are going to offer to have a team for this game, I feel like it should be promoted. And that was definitely not the way that the rest of the squad saw it. And it led me feeling extremely bad because, of course, as the broadcaster, I'm the boots on the ground staff member there for the team. The ones that the teams and the players were always seeing around the arena or around the rooms and whatnot. And you can see just the sadness on their faces when it's like, yeah, I know technically today's an off day, but no, I haven't been scheduled to stream your match, even though I know you're going for your division semifinal. And that makes me mad. It makes me just as sad as the players. And just it's unfortunately something you do need to prep for if you do get offered and accept an academy offer. You are basically just there as an enrollment statistic for the program. And I hate to tell you that, but it is. So yeah, just as you're recruiting and trying to get into one of these big schools, just do keep in mind, again, if you get offered a sub position, or if you get offered an academy roster position, realize that you are going to get next to no exposure one way or another. If you're on the main roster as a sub, nobody wants to play with you. Nobody wants to promote you unless you absolutely pop off in an emergency kind of scenario, which is of course extremely rare. Of the years that I've done it, it maybe only was successful on one, maybe two occasions. And even then, that substitute that came in, the super sub that came in and popped off in the scenario, held their own, proving that they could have been on that main starting slot that whole time, just ended up getting demoted to academy anyway the next season. They'll tell you something along the lines of like, yeah, you're really good and whatnot. Why don't you be the coach for academy? And that's just a trap that I don't wish upon anybody. So again, please keep in mind, if you get those kind of offers, sure, you may be on the roster sheet for a very, very successful team. But will you actually get playtime? Not guaranteed. Will you actually be promoted at all as a part of said team? Unlikely. Are you still going to be expected to show up to every single practice and game as if you're going to be starting? Yes. You still have to give up the time and twiddle your thumbs behind the players that are actually playing. But, in theory, you're on that roster sheet. But to me, at least, that sounds like a miserable time. That's just me, though. There are some people that are absolutely able to stomach it. So again, just you gotta keep in mind. Do you want to be on that roster that is very, very likely to win but never get any real field time or not be known? Or do you want to be the star of a worse team? Whew. Water break after yapping that much. Almost feel like I'm a professor of sorts giving a lecture here. Hopefully I don't bore you. I already know you're on your phones because you're probably watching this, right? No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Is there anything else that I want to mention for players in particular? Yes, but it's more so in the parents section, so I'll explain that when we get there. Oh, that was just for varsity. So, say maybe you're a little bit lower on the ladder, or you are one of these players that is extremely skilled, has a great ranking, but maybe doesn't necessarily have the pro experience to really back them up, and the big teams aren't looking to recruit you, or the only thing they'll give you is that sub or academy slot, and you're not really looking for that. So what do you end up having to get yourself into? So you're going to be looking for either a middle of the pack team, an upstart, or in the worst case scenario, a club. I'll kind of go over that here in just a moment. For a mid-pack team, I refer to this as a program that has maybe one staff member who has to do every single job in the program. So they end up being the director, the marketer, the broadcaster if they actually know how to do that, which most of the time they don't, as well as being the manager slash coach of any teams that they happen to have. As you can tell, that is many hats, and I don't care how big your head is, you do not have enough space for that many hats. These people are absolutely overwhelmed as is. They probably have a budget, but it is probably extremely low, and they have to basically beg for anything for the esports program to actually obtain. They likely cannot offer you a big time scholarship. They will not have full rides. It could be something as simple as throwing like $500 at you per semester, just to try and offset some of your costs, which by all means to still be able to go to college and compete and do that, like, that is still fine. I don't want to knock it, but they just don't necessarily have the resources dedicated to esports like some of these other big teams, and their results 9 times out of 10 do reflect that, where they end up being a middle of the pack team, where they'll beat the clubs, they'll beat upstarts, but they have a very, very hard time up against the other top tier schools. Not to say that they can't beat them, because I've seen many, many times where those kind of programs have, but the likelihood is much lower compared to being on one of those big varsity teams. Any other staff that are a part of that team usually tend to be volunteers as well, so they aren't necessarily as invested into the program, because obviously they're not getting compensated or anything for it, right? So fair enough. And because of this, the director does not have enough bandwidth to be able to keep track of everything. So these programs tend to be a little bit more relaxed compared to the big varsity programs, which in certain regards can be a plus, but like their attendance, for example, it's probably looser. Do they have their own GPA requirements? Maybe, maybe not. Some do, some don't. But these teams eventually, because of their looseness, does end up leading to maybe a little bit more reliability problems, where teammates are kind of just fighting with each other constantly. The coach might be even younger than the players themselves, so the coach isn't respected, and it's just a constant power dynamic problem. I mean, you see this with the big varsity teams too, but you'll see it a lot more when you have volunteers coming in like this. And they may get enough budget to enter these big leagues for collegiate, but they're oftentimes just pot fillers for the big kahunas. If the only thing your school has, though, is a esports club, then brace yourself, because this isn't going to be a smooth ride in the slightest. They are easily the worst, and they are some of the most painful experience I've ever personally had as a esports broadcaster, because any of these teams that had no staff members, was strictly run by students, were the most unreliable teams as you can possibly imagine, which I mean is kind of to be expected. They're not getting paid to be here. They're all just volunteers. A lot of times they're just there for the sake of the community and are just happy to hang out and play games. They're probably not going to be competitive in the slightest. Practices are probably going to end up being optional, so you're never going to actually get proper scrims. There's likely no scholarships at all. It's just madness. It's the perfect way, however, for someone like myself, I guess, who constantly finds himself in like gold and platinum in majority of the competitions. If I were to go in and want to play in collegiate tournaments or collegiate leagues, it's probably the easiest way for a super casual like me to get involved in it, just to have some fun. But if you're trying to shoot for pro, good God, stay away from a club. Do not, unless you're going to run it yourself. Then it's all in the ball's in your court at that point with how you run it. I have seen clubs pop off. Don't get me wrong, but it is so rare nowadays. But that basically sums things up for the player side of things. If anybody has any questions in regards to being a player, I'll gladly accept. One thing as well, because I think I am going to be turning this into a slightly edited but a longer video, not just a short. So if anybody happens to have any questions after the fact, if you're watching this on YouTube, throw it in the comments and I will 100% answer if I actually have a proper non-guessing answer, if it's something within my scope. Alright, so you want to get involved in esports, but you do not want to be a player per se. Looking to be maybe a coach, or maybe you wanted to be a broadcaster like myself, or in social media. That is something I can definitely talk about. In regards to becoming a director, I will admit I am not necessarily the most knowledgeable in that. A lot of times it's just a matter of having prior experience in the right place in the right time as a college or university is making their own team, and then just outshining the rest of the competition with your portfolio. But in regards to the other three here, so as the broadcaster, like, I know I'm biased because that's where things are, but the way that I see it is the collegiate esports broadcasters, or broadcasters in general, you're not just streaming for the moment, but you should also be streaming for your program and team's legacy. Start now and you can watch down the road, like graduates, alumni, maybe they eventually become parents and want to show their kids. Like, you can have an active recording and time capsule of your team's successes, your losses, your big championships, what have you. You are there to also work alongside marketing to do social media posts with clips that you are making. And it's definitely like very, very important. But as the worker, you do need to also keep in the back of your mind, you're probably not bringing in anything in regards to money to the program. So in my position, I was paid to be the broadcast broadcast production manager. And I would do my damnedest every single night to like, sell the team, sell the college or university as the place to be for esports, why our players are the coolest, why we do nothing but win, why we are the championship favorites, what have you. But the things like ad revenue from a Twitch stream, that doesn't necessarily move the needle. I tried to do more alongside the program to make it worth more to sub to it. Maybe change the way that we handle the broadcasts to maybe be a little bit more personal, viewer to viewer or viewer to broadcaster. Maybe change things and not be the traditional suit and tie esports style. But the teams and programs don't necessarily care. They would rather be prim and proper suit and tie with no personality and with like just the flashiest technology, but then just have no attachment. There's a lot of times no community aspect to it. So with that, like a lot of because they're not focusing on community stuff alongside with you, it means that you're not bringing in any money. So broadcasters, if there are cuts to your team, guess where the knife's coming first? It's coming to you. If you had the opportunity to be able to bring on students as like work studies, for example, for the broadcast, it's coming there first. What a lot of programs that I am seeing now, and it's absolutely heartbreaking, they are looking for someone like how I was back when I was first getting started, where I happen to maybe be an eager student that happens to be there, who is willing to broadcast the team's matches for maybe a jersey, and if you're lucky, maybe a tiny little scholarship at most. But a lot of times it's heavily reliant on volunteers now. And here is my advice to the workers for broadcasting. Absolutely, like, get involved with it. Take advantage of this chance to build your portfolio, show what you can do. If they happen to have specialized equipment that's a little bit fancier than just an OBS setup, take advantage to learn that, because there is a lot of transferable skills from using like fancy broadcast equipment in an esports setting to, say, going over to a traditional sports setting and using the same thing. Your switcher boards, your mixers, if you happen to be in an arena, lighting and screen, like arena equipment, like take advantage of that opportunity. But as soon as you have the opportunity to go find something else, make your own product or get a part of another company, run for it and take it as fast as possible, because the workload expectation for a lot of these big varsity teams is not going to match anything near what they can actually give you back in compensation. As someone who, like, I'll admit, was paid as a full-time esports broadcaster, the salary seemed okay at first. It was about, say, I don't know if I want to necessarily give that, but to give a metaphor per se, not a metaphor, but an example. I would be there basically every single day of the week, because you had to have office hours that started at around 12. Then the matches did not start until like 6, 7. And in those office hours, you could plan, make your overlays, make your graphics, try to plan interviews with people. And sometimes they still don't even cooperate within huge time frames. And you would have to be there 5 days a week for sure, because the way that these leagues run is they don't run a lot of these games simultaneously. It's usually they have one game per night, which in terms of making content is absolutely perfect. However, if you are a solo individual trying to stream all of these matches, you are there in my position from 12 till 11, 7 days a week. It's a bit of a nightmare. It's overwhelming, and the workload compared to the wage was worse than minimum, to be completely honest with you. And you can probably understand why working those hours as someone who became a new father was kind of heartbreaking, because I understand that, say, for professional sports, for example, I get it. Like, going from town to town to town, you're not home very often, you're a professional, you're competing, you're streaming match, or not streaming, you're broadcasting, doing whatever, but they're paid rather handsomely to be in that position, to take away their time from their family that often. Esports is not in that position, and if money does flow back into esports, it's not going into broadcasting right away. Not a chance. So, what I'll say to a broadcast worker, again, your portfolio is going to be the make or break. Build that thing up as long as you possibly can until you could find either your own projects that you can monetize yourself off of, or another opportunity with another company or something. I am very, very thankful, because the big thing that I got my fulfillment in when working at this place wasn't necessarily streaming the matches itself. It was teaching people from the ground up how to stream and how to broadcast, how to cast, be a commentator, observer, what have you. And then see them want that itch to go further, to the point where they surpassed me, and I not won Emmys. I should be jealous. And a little bit, I'm not gonna lie, I wish I was kind of in that position, but I am as proud as can be. And it means the world to me that they may have started with me, but they learned the basics, but then got the drive to become more advanced than I ever could, and took it to the moon. I love that. It's when I want to see more of that. So I need anybody who's watching this, who wants to be a broadcaster, or this applies for marketing or any of these positions. Take the opportunity while you can, but note, if you're going to end up being a full-time broadcaster, full-time social media, because they're in the exact same boat. They're replace the broadcasting for all-day social media posts and clipping of the matches as they're happening, while maybe trying to get some like additional interview content as well. They have it just as crazy. I know there was someone in marketing at the same time that I was, that was getting the same kind of treatment, same kind of hours as I was. But thankfully for their instance, they did not have a family to worry about necessarily at home. It's not necessarily a bad thing, I'm not trying to knock it for them, but they had more bandwidth to take that opportunity and run than I did. So as you're starting off and volunteering with your local team, for example, to try and stream their matches, use that opportunity again, build your portfolio, but make it clear how much time you can afford to give to the program each week, and make sure that it's no more, no less. Whether it be paid or volunteer, I've seen it too many times where it starts off as maybe doing 1 or 2 nights of streaming because you like this game, then all of a sudden they ask you to do this. Then all of a sudden they ask you to do this, and this, and this, and this, and they just add more and more and more to your plate, without actually changing any of the compensation, or it's volunteer in the first place and you're just overwhelming yourself. So please be cautious. Please keep that in mind. Parents, this next part's for you. So if you had the opportunity to hear what I was saying in prior, then perfect. If not, it's okay. I'll very, very quickly do a little bit of a recap here. So first off, of course, esports is basically the opportunity for gamers like myself, possibly your children, like to play games and whatnot, by, say, getting scholarships to play video games is 100% a thing. It is not a fraud, it is not a scam, and it can be done tastefully, and a lot of times it is handled in a perfect way where people who tend to be maybe a little bit shyer or a little bit quieter, maybe not as socially adept, have an opportunity to join a community with like-minded people and with the same kind of like social skills as them, and give them a place where they can belong. First and foremost, that's how esports is. That's how it was supposed to be. Granted, a lot of teams have kind of missed that point nowadays, but that was the initial idea of esports in the first place. Basically, yeah, you can absolutely get scholarships for it. It's not a scam. It is actually a thing. I just heavily ask you to research into each individual college or university that your child might want to go to, because of the different types of teams there are. If you're going to enroll them into a team that is only a club, they are going to have a much rougher time compared to if it was a mid-tier or varsity team in terms of how serious it is. But it also will take a toll on like the time with your child. If you constantly have like Sunday dinner or something together, and all of a sudden like they're not home because their tournament that started at 12 is still going on because they went far, not only is that something that happens often, that's something that could basically happen every weekend. So it will take you away, just like as if they were a travel football team. And it's not that they're dicking around, it's not that they're just playing games for the fun of it. No, that's their competition. That's what's earning them their scholarship, that they're going for championships. So that is something I need to emphasize to parents, that it's majority of the time anyway, it's not just them messing around. One thing that, of course, there's plenty of different games. One thing I'm thinking about personally doing is kind of going over some of the major esports and at least breaking it down to a digestible level. Because a lot of times in order to watch esports, kind of have to know the game a little bit, and not very many of them are as obvious as it can be, or not as obvious compared to others. The one I will say is the exception is for anyone who happens to have a child that plays Rocket League. It's car soccer. Okay, flying car, hit ball into net, score goal. Like, we got that one. But when you start getting into some of these other titles, yes, it can be very, very confusing. But it would probably make your child's day to ask them, how did how'd the game go, and maybe pull up the VOD of their stream if they happen to be on it, and it's like, so how does this work? They may be rather reserved, they may be rather quiet, they may not oftentimes go out of their way to explain what they're doing, but I guarantee you they'll be like a deer in headlights looking at you with eventually a smile coming across their face as they explain how their game works. There's gonna be a lot, especially for certain titles, but honestly, I guarantee you it'd mean the world to them if you gave the effort to do so. Okay, here's the part that's going to get me canceled. Oh boy. So I've been talking about how good collegiate esports is. So this is like the actual like varsity esports team competing for college versus college or university championships. I'm completely all for that and have been very, very positive on it overall over this last hour or so. Now, in regards to actually going to college or university for an esports academic course, as somebody who's gone through it, it is useless. Absolutely useless. Literally all this academic program, at least personally how I felt going through the program, is that this course is here to try and entice players that are on the verge of, I guess, being professional, but aren't interested in going to school, to give them a joke course that's easy enough and almost brain dead enough that they can go through to be a part of a varsity team for about 2 years. Then when they graduate, if they're a good enough player and good enough student, try to then get them to take a normal course at that exact same college or university after the fact. Like, okay, I went there for esports and now once I graduate I can do business. I cannot emphasize enough just how useless this is. Just should have gone for business. So that personally is a major red flag. And if your child comes to you saying, I want to go to school for esports, I would personally tell my own children right here, right now, no. I'm not paying for that. I would much rather, and the smarter way to do this, because at the end of the day, like college esports and whatnot, or collegiate esports, this is your opportunity to compete, try and push your way to pro, but also while getting skills for an additional career in case it doesn't work out. So to be a competitive esports player and then taking esports, it's just all inning you further and pushing you further down the line in age before you actually learn some major skills. Anybody I know who has actually gotten a degree, or no, excuse me, has actually gotten a job in esports after taking the esports course, got the job with nothing to do with the actual certificate or diploma itself. It was because of the activities they did while at school for esports. What do I mean by that? So I know, say, one person moved pretty far away who ended up being their own esports director. The esports diploma sure showed that they had knowledge in esports, but I think being the president of the esports club was probably a little bit heavier in terms of moving the needle compared to the certificate or diploma, especially when it comes to management. You were the president of a club that was rather successful. It was the extracurricular that helped push that. Same thing with another individual a little bit closer, is I believe an assistant director at another school. I apologize for not dropping the actual names of the schools or the names of the individuals, but for my privacy and theirs, can't necessarily do that. But they got their job, again, because they were running many events through the esports club. The diploma or certificate probably did nothing. Myself getting the job as a broadcaster at the college or university that I was at was a promise given by the CEO that they would try to get me a job if I completed that course. I did, and I got it, so fair enough, they kept their word. But again, I mean, I guess the ethics behind that can be sometimes a little bit questioned, but at the same time, it wasn't necessarily the certificate that got me the job in that instance. That was networking. And then many others, like I was saying with the broadcasters, I've had people that I know, they started with me. They learned the basics. They eventually took the reins and ran, learned some fancier equipment, some fancier programs. They had the opportunity to go work with Riots. They took it and ran, and they are in a fantastic position. They didn't even finish the esports program. So, I'll emphasize again, the certificate or the diploma itself is unlikely to get you anywhere. And then, at least personally, based off of my job hunts as of lately, I find trying to explain what my esports certificate is actually puts me in a worse off position as if I just led with being a Walmart clerk. Not that I'm just like having a hard time explaining the job, no, because I can explain like everything about it, the management side of things, how long and hard I worked, and my portfolio. But a lot of employers just don't care. So what I would do as a parent, one more time here, what I would end up doing if my child ended up wanting to go to school for esports, I would try my very, very best to have them find something about the esports program that they like. Like, say maybe they do want to be into like team and league management or something like that. Like, there is sports and rec programs at majority of colleges and universities that's a little bit more known that you can take. If you want the business side of esports, take a business course and then volunteer for the esports team. If you want to be in media production or be the streamer or the broadcaster, there are multimedia courses in a lot of these colleges and universities. Do those, push for those, and then volunteer for the esports team to build your portfolio that way. That way you'll be coming out with a good certificate, good diploma that majority of the employment world will already respect, while also having the portfolio to back yourself up knowing esports. Whew. Thank y'all for sticking with me here. Quick water break one more time. Try to relax before this next part here. Need the waves back. It feels good getting this off my chest, though. I realize that it's something that not a lot of people want to hear, but if it helps somebody, then I'm happy. Next up, okay. This one is, we're gonna circle it back to the players. So, this is for the people that are currently not committed to one esports title or to one game. Not every game is made equal here in esports. You may have heard me say a little bit earlier that depending on which game you are playing could very well have a factor with how much scholarship or how much money you can actually make in tier 2 or in collegiate, or same thing depending on who you're talking to. So actually I'm going to do the streamer thing and hope this didn't break. No, we don't have a stream scuff this time. Not this time. Let's quickly throw this back here. Okay. Oh, hello there. All right. Here's what we're gonna do. Here's our exercise for today. What I have in front of me is a tier list. For a lot of the younger audiences, probably a lot of the players, you're probably rather familiar with these. Normally, you would rank these in a sense of like which character is best in a game or something along those lines. But today we are going to be using it to grade esports based off of how valuable they currently are to their collegiate program. I will say first off, feel free to post in the comments or in the chat if there is a game that I do not have on this list. However, if your game is not on this list, it is likely not very valuable. This list is based off of my experience in the collegiate esports space for almost a decade, of course. And in terms of like which leagues actually have these games as things that you can play, which of these games are basically useless now, and then which ones are basically your core esports or are any up and coming, as you'll see here. In the green, I know I have the colors maybe reversed for a traditional tier list, but in the green, if you were to stop everything and pick up one esport to play to try and get into collegiate, the core esports section up in the green at the very, very top, these are the games that I see that have basically been there since I started in collegiate. They have been still steady since I stopped being in collegiate years and years and years later. They are still here, they still have strong player bases, and I do not see these esports falling off. However, they will also have the most competition with the highest player bases, so please do keep that in mind. The next section lower, core but falling off, so very, very simple. Like, they were some of the mainstream collegiate esports from when I started, but I can tell that the player base and the game itself started losing steam by the time that I left. So a lot of collegiate teams still have support for these games, but they are not the most sought after ones. And it might be a little bit easier to get into them because there's less players trying to get onto those teams, but they are slightly at risk of eventually becoming more obscure and less supported. Up and coming is going to be, as it says, up and coming, of course, where it wasn't there at the start when I was working in collegiate, but it kind of started to show its face and have a little bit of steam and might have a lot of popularity to the point where some collegiate teams will pick up this game and start supporting it, but it may be at a very, very minimal fashion. I'll explain more as we go through. overshadowed. So these are games that had good player bases but have long since not necessarily overstayed their welcome, but aren't as popular. So teams tend to maybe pick up a team for this game, but they don't give them like anything in terms of resources. They won't necessarily turn you down, but they're not going to invest heavily into you. And that's in regards to peripherals, your equipment, your time on social media, and you probably won't ever be on like a stream either, depending on the varsity program you go to. We have a team for this. Is basically you're an enrollment statistic where it's easy to pick up a player for this game, just completely forget they exist, but hey, you got the tuition money. You'll never be seen on stream. You'll never get a post made about yourself on the social media. Nobody's going to ask you for an interview. You're just kind of there. And your scholarships are probably going to be the lowest of the entire team. So you ready to do this thing? Oh. Oh. Okay. Let's go here. Let's start with... There may be certain instances, actually, like I'm just kind of spotting it out right now. I had set this up beforehand, but there are some titles here that are in like the same kind of category. And I will group them together unless they have different locations. So as an example, I'm going to take Apex and Fortnite to start us off here. There's two rather popular games, but in terms of collegiate, as of last I known, Apex does have Octane Collegiate, but that's not necessarily a well-reputable, like, top-tier collegiate league in the eyes of majority of varsity programs. So teams know that, like, you can have value from having an Apex team, but they will likely not promote it in the slightest. So in this instance here, Apex, you are forgotten. We have an Apex team. Yes, we do, but you would have never guessed. Fortnite was an unfortunate fall off. They originally had, I believe it was NACE, built into the Fortnite client, and you would be able to like sign up for collegiate stuff right through Fortnite. It was actually like really well run. You can broadcast it really easy. It was fun to watch. But support for it basically died immediately. And it's never really been able to get back up there since. I think there is still ECAC that runs Fortnite competitions in terms of duos and trios. But it's another very similar to Apex where, yes, we realize we can have value and get a team for this, but we're likely not promoting it at all. We have a Fortnite team. They are forgotten. Counter-Strike. So this was Counter-Strike Global Offensive. When I was working with it, it just had turned into Counter-Strike 2 shortly before I left. And Counter-Strike has a bit of a problem, and its main name is Valorant. And the main issue that's a thing is that a lot of schools would rather pick up Valorant than Counter-Strike. And it is for one simple and stupid reason, and it's because Counter-Strike still refuses to call it attack and defense, but has to use the terms terrorist and counter-terrorist. For that single reason alone, a lot of schools refuse to support a Counter-Strike team. The few schools that do not put much emphasis on Counter-Strike. You know, Counter-Strike, it used to be a NACE staple. It used to be a core sport even, I would call, back when I first started. But since Valorant came around and the player base and interest just dropped, NACE dropped Counter-Strike, and now I think the only place that you can play collegiate Counter-Strike is in either Face It or what's the other one? ECAC. And while like it's okay, you could technically make a team. A lot of collegiate institutions are not prioritizing it at all. Yes, they have a Counter-Strike team, but you'll never really hear about it. But at least they know that they actually have a team. So, Counter-Strike, you're going into overshadowed. iRacing. One close, near, and dear to my heart. Of course, it wasn't necessarily a competitor, or I did compete a little bit, I should say, but as well as being a broadcaster for the longest time, I also did work as a iRacing team manager. Was very, very thankful to have the opportunity to win a collegiate iRacing league championship. Still one of the highlights of my life. But in terms of the iRacing team being something like sought after, or is it forgotten? It's basically, what has it got for competitions? So there's eNASCAR that is a part of Playfly, if I do recall correctly. Either that or NACE, one of the two. So it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. There is NASCAR tie-ins to collegiate, but even still, it isn't really pushed too heavily or sought after too heavily by collegiate institutions, which mean, and their schedule is very, very light. So they only have a couple races a semester, maybe like 4 or 5 races. So it's not a very, very heavy commitment for either the player or the program to actually support a team and compete, but they hardly will ever acknowledge it. So the only like weekly league that there is for iRacing that I know of right now is the Collegiate iRacing League, which is probably the more prestigious league there for iRacing. However, it is basically a community-driven league, so it doesn't really get onto the radars of many of the varsity programs. I know Ball State are absolutely ridiculous, for example. They like actually have like professional drivers and whatnot come in and race the sim rigs for their college, but again, they get a little bit of support, but I don't think it's necessarily top level. I'd love to be proven wrong, but majority of what I'm trying to say is majority of schools are basically going to overshadow this big time. And I know personally the only time that I was ever able to convince my my coworkers to actually tune into the iRacing program was the day that we were winning the championship, or trying to win the championship. And even that was pulling teeth. So with that, we have a team for this. Actually, no. Because there is one thing that does actually stand this out. I'm going to put it into overshadowed, because there is one thing that you can actually do as a collegiate program. And that, if you have your own sim rigs, it does not have to be fancy. But if you happen to have sim rigs for iRacing in like your gaming space, that's one of those things that even a normie, or just like a regular casual gamer, or not even necessarily a gamer, just anybody walking by could see the sim rig and say, hey, I want to do, like, can I do some laps? Which is one way to, I guess, utilize your equipment and just kind of get it noticed. So it's not necessarily, and we have a team for this status, but a lot of times iRacing is just getting ignored. So I'll put it with Counter-Strike in overshadowed. League of Legends, okay. Let's see here. League of Legends, of course, one of the biggest esports in the world, and still is even in collegiate. However, there's a problem. High schoolers are not playing League. They have so much more to pick from, and a lot of people in high school, from what I understand, while yes, of course, there are people in high school that do play League, it wasn't the staple that it once was back when I was in high school, for example. So what I will end up putting this into is, yes, it is a core esport, but it is falling off. For anybody who is willing, though, to take League as their main game, you have a lot of opportunities, though. Since the amount of players is smaller, trying to find recruits is tougher. And there are plenty of leagues for League of Legends in collegiate. I think Mace has one, NECC has one, ECAC has one, Riot has their own. So any varsity team that is looking for games to pick up usually has League of Legends. So it can be the perfect game to get into to secure yourself as a collegiate esports player. But of course, that actually requires playing a ton of League of Legends. So sure, like again, just to kind of wrap that one up. So yes, League of Legends is still a core esport. I don't see varsity teams dropping League of Legends. There's just too many leagues that they can be a part of still. However, this might start kind of be grandfathered kind of in, where like peak scholarships may go a little bit lower unless you see like professionals, ex-professionals kind of coming in, taking the top spots. Because I guess League is at a little bit of a risk of that. We have seen a lot of that over the last year or two. But again, there's still plenty of positions available. It's not a bad pick, and it's not going anywhere. But because it's falling off, the opportunity's there. Up and coming here for Marvel Rivals, because it's basically just too popular to ignore, and esports leagues are taking notice. I know there is a Marvel Rivals Collegiate League that's kind of a grassroots community-run one right now, but I do believe, and I very well could be wrong on this, but I do believe that they are also trying to have some support through NECC and maybe ECAC for this next semester coming up. So if you are into Marvel Rivals, you have a little bit of a risk, because it's going to go one of two ways. Either esports or collegiate esports leagues are going to wait and see and not pull the trigger on Marvel Rivals, or they are going to go guns blazing and every college and university is going to want a Marvel Rivals team now. You even see maybe a little bit of that already. Even though leagues aren't necessarily set in stone, there are some league or some varsity teams I know of that are already recruiting for Marvel Rivals, kind of testing the waters and seeing what kind of rosters they can build, hoping that a league is made. So a little bit of risk, potential high reward. Because of how popular Marvel Rivals is right now, it could turn into maybe a core esport, but it could also just be put on the sidelines and not supported. So kind of a scary spot right now for the Marvel Rivals players, but again, potential big reward. Next up, we got Magic the Gathering Arena. So card games, I'm also going to pair Hearthstone with this. Unless you are already buying the cards for your own casual or competitive play personally, there is no point to get started now, because you are not getting acknowledged at all. Both Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering have the same thing, just extremely low player bases, extremely high barrier to entry due to the paywall of actually getting cards. And now more and more and more leagues have dropped both Hearthstone and have not supported Magic the Gathering Arena. So if you're starting from square one trying to get into esports, I would not recommend either of the card games. All right, I'm going to spew a bunch of them out right now. You'll see NHL's parked here on the left-hand side. I am going to take every single sports game here and do the exact same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, all into the we have a team for this category. ECAC is the only league that I know of right now that actually supports traditional sports games in the collegiate space. And a lot of times, from what I understand, they only have those because of uninformed, stupid esports directors. Now let me explain that one. I say stupid esports directors because there's people, like there are some directors out there that think of esports and immediately think, oh, so you're just talking about the hockey games? Like football, just like they have competitions for Madden, not realizing what esports actually is. So they're tasked to make an esports team, and they foolishly pick up NHL, 2K, EAFC, Madden as core titles, only to realize they only have one place to play, and even then the player base is so small that they put themselves into a bit of a trap. The only exception I've seen is when a varsity team picks up sports games long after they've already started, because a volunteer has come up to them who is very, very passionate about that type of game and wants to do it for fun. Then they'll like gladly take them in and give like a very, very minimal to next to no budget to recruit players and get more players enrolled. So either way, just don't get into a sports game. Next up, Overwatch. So Overwatch 2 now. I know it's the original Overwatch logo, bear with me about that. But this is going into core but falling off. And that currently is because of player base. Of course, Marvel Rivals and Overwatch, I mean, it's a tale as old as time at this point. They're two very, very similar games. And a lot of people were very, very, and still are very, very angry at Overwatch's developers for how they handled the game. Here's the thing though. Overwatch still has a ton of support from collegiate leagues. NACE has it, NECC has it, ECAC has it, and then Activision Blizzard has their own collegiate Overwatch league as well. So there are plenty of places to play, and it still makes it one of the core teams that colleges are willing to put some resources into, one of the first couple of teams that they're going to support. But depending on Overwatch's player base and the amount of pressure coming from Marvel Rivals, there is potential in upcoming years where maybe Marvel Rivals takes the place of Overwatch in terms of your top hero shooter-esque kind of style. But that's all going to be determined by the leagues, and it's really going to be determined by how long Activision Blizzard continues to support collegiate Overwatch through their own tournament. The moment that Activision Blizzard stop their own tournament, there is risk, I believe, of Overwatch falling down. But in the meantime, similar to League of Legends, there is a need for Overwatch players. Pretty much every esports team has a team for Overwatch. You could get in, and maybe if you're even at the most skilled, you might be able to find yourself on a second, like, academy team or something, and still get to play just for the sake of playing. It's still absolutely something that can happen. So Overwatch isn't necessarily going anywhere, but it's still something I'm going to be keeping my eye on over the next 5 years or so. Next up, one of my favorites, To think that a long, long time ago I did not like this game, then was forced to broadcast it one day and pretty well fell in love instantly. Rainbow Six Siege. Rainbow Six Siege is an interesting one. It doesn't necessarily have the support of the big leagues anymore, so you like your NACE, NECC, or even your ECAC. But they do have CR6, or the Collegiate R6, which has been around long enough and reputable and run properly. Like, well, I guess some will argue, but it's been run strongly overall for a long time, to the point where it's more than just a community-based league, but it's just, like, it's not supported by Ubisoft, it's not supported by any of the big leagues or anything, but there is still at least the one place to play. And with that, it's a little bit better than we have a team for this, but it will get put into the overshadowed category. Because overall, I just do not see much posts straight up for anything Rainbow Six wise. Even back in the day, I would want to have Rainbow Six as one of our core, like, weekly streamed games, and a lot of times it was turned down until it was told that we were actually in a championship contention. Then, oh, okay, maybe it's time to get R6 some matches on stream. It's funny how things change. But as soon as we were falling out of contention, then they basically had to fall back down the pecking order. So they are 100% overshadowed, not core in the slightest. Not a lot of collegiate institutions are hosting teams for them anymore. I see a lot of clubs or individual community members making teams for these instead, but you do at least have a place to play. That part's secured. Okay. Next up, Rocket League. Baby's first esports. So basically every single varsity program across North America has Rocket League as one of their first teams if they know anything about what they're doing. It is harmless, it's easy to promote, it's easy to understand, and teams are only 3 players big. It is the perfect esport for a program to pick up when brand new. Granted, it's been around for a little while, or quite a while rather. So if you're just starting now and trying to get into Rocket League, you could have a hard time getting up into the skill level necessary to be competitive. But it's really easy to make a second or a third team as a varsity program for Rocket League because the teams are so small. And then, of course, in terms of leagues that actually support it, NACE supports it, NECC supports it, ECAC supports it. Psionics themselves support the game with their own league, with the Collegiate Rocket League that gets posted and streamed live from Rocket League's own channel to hundreds of thousands of viewers, especially if drops are on. So it is an absolute core esports title. Unless Rocket League takes the servers down or the DDoSers do, that esport is not going anywhere. It is a safe bet to get into, but you do have quite the hill to climb to get competitive with it. Next up, Valorant. So in a similar nature to League of Legends, Valorant does have the perk of also having their own Riot-sanctioned collegiate league via CVAL. And because of that, a lot of varsity esports teams already had it on their radar. And now basically every collegiate team or not collegiate team, but every collegiate league that I'm aware of has some sort of Valorant competition, to the point where it cannot be ignored. Valorant is a core esports that will probably not be going anywhere within the next 5 years. Its nearest competition, of course, is currently Counter-Strike, which has been on the decline. And Valorant is just a little bit easier to promote as a varsity program. You don't have to worry about the terrorist or counter-terrorist side. You're not planting the bomb, it's just a spike. The animations, the art style is a little bit less intense. Watching the damn matches is another thing. Watching it can be visual diarrhea, but as a player getting into Valorant, you gotta watch out for these pros that try to go pro in tier 2, because their tier 2 scene is an absolute mess. Try to go pro, doesn't work, so now they're going into collegiate. But what I've been seeing is that Valorant oftentimes has so many people applying for it that, almost similar to Rocket League, it's almost easy to guarantee yourself a second team, to have an academy team. There is also a little bit of another thing that I haven't really mentioned at all here, and that's like game changers. So the marginalized gender teams, Valorant's been having leagues specifically for that as well, while the rest of these games have not, and that could be a specific niche that maybe you can find yourself in. So either way, no matter what, you'll find a Valorant team pretty much at every school that supports esports. And there's plenty of places to play. Valorant's top tier. Okay, I'm gonna take Smash Bros. Oh, actually, no, they're actually separated in my mind here. Melee is up front here. I'm just gonna keep it simple. Melee, unfortunately, just has absolutely nowhere to play. The game's been out for so long, to the point where if you're just trying to pick up Melee now, it is probably not worth your time. Not that you're too far behind, but the amount of effort necessary to get good is ridiculous, considering there's next to nowhere to play in collegiate for it. I would completely ignore Super Smash Bros. Melee. However, on the contrary, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is rather supported by the collegiate leagues. Majority of varsity programs pick it up as well. If they want to pick up a fighting game but don't want anything too realistic, Smash is always good to go to. Smash, of course, is always played on the Nintendo Switch as well, so you can pick up some Switches and not take up space in your computer lab, so that you can have more teams playing at once. Logistically, it makes sense. The leagues themselves pick up the game as well. I think NACE, NECC, ECAC all support Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and they do a crew battle style, so it's 5-on-5, so they're always looking for players. I have seen some collegiate teams, as well as a part of being on the team, maybe get to go to an offline tournament. I know personally I've had the opportunity, or I've not had the opportunity, but I've seen the team that I had worked with go to like the Big House, for example, or some other US mini majors, some tournaments, going to Canada, go to like London, go to Toronto kind of thing. So there's a little bit of potential, but it depends on how much budget the team is willing, or the program is willing to give that team. And I'll say it's falling off because Smash Ultimate is not really necessarily anybody's first game of choice anymore. There's a lot of people that like casually play Smash, but they're not like heavy into the tournament scene. But there's still plenty of places to play. So it might not be a bad idea. If you're already good at Smash or you want to get started with it, it's definitely an option. On the contrary here, my FGC, my fighting game community. I have Street Fighter and Tekken here, but you can basically substitute this in for the entirety of FGC. Your Guilty Gears or Blaze Blues, whatever you happen to be playing. From what I understand, FGC has their home in a community league called the Collegiate FGC, which does stream their own matches and whatnot, but it is still, of course, community run and not really like supported by anything. And then ECAC has a couple of fighting game titles, but not very many. So while it is easy to pick up because you just need the one player, a lot of varsity programs will pick up players that are for fighting games, but you're basically an enrollment statistic. They'll gladly take you in, but they'll never hear from you, or you'll never hear from them again. We have a team for this, is where they'll land. Almost at the end here. One more time. Just quick water break. Alright, let's do this thing. Omega Strikers. While a very, very fun game, and I was very, very thankful to have watched and streamed a handful of matches of the Omega Strikers team while I was there, Omega Strikers finds itself into a position that no game should have to try and deal with, and that is the developers have acknowledged that they have completely cut support for the game. There will be no more updates, maybe just bug fixes if you're lucky. So that by itself turns a lot of varsity programs off away from Omega Strikers. And then in terms of places where you can actually play it, ECAC did have a league for it, but I'm not sure if they are bringing it back in 2025 or 2025-26. And the other league is a community league, Collegiate Core Strike League, which is, again, like I was saying, it was a community league that's not necessarily supported by anything. So it's definitely heartbreaking considering that Omega Strikers, when it was in beta, was actually heavily involved in Collegiate, to the point where a lot of teams' logos even got the opportunity to be in the game, and then the Collegiate teams, Collegiate players from other games were allowed to become beta testers for the game. It had a very, very well supported and bright looking future, but they did cut this game off rather quickly, unfortunately. And because of that, they are getting put next to the FGC here in the We Have a Team for This department. Pokemon Unite, I'm also going to put this in here for Pokemon VGC, but it's just going to be under the same block. So this is weird because I feel like there is the potential for something to happen, but it may not be this year. So right now, I guess I've kind of spoiled it a little bit. Pokemon Unite or Pokemon VGC, I'm going to put it down until we have a team for this, because very, very few, if anybody, is actually going to be recruiting for this right now. There's nowhere really to play. However, I do feel like there is probably a better chance of the high school crowd being more of a fan of Pokemon Unite compared to League of Legends in terms of player base. I also think that Pokemon VGC, once Pokemon Champions releases on mobile, or on mobile and Switch, bringing VGC to the phones and Switch and whatnot, I do believe that is going to be opening the door for potential league to start. So this one could be maybe up and coming in a year or two. But right now, it's probably not worth your time per se. But hey, if I come back to this maybe next year, maybe it'll be up a little bit higher. We'll see. I personally would love to see it. Like I was saying during my Pokemon stream, my time streaming Pokemon VGC was probably some of the most fun and most wholesome I've ever felt doing esports broadcasts and belonging to a community. And I miss that dearly. I'm sad that it doesn't get to happen too much anymore. Next up, PUBG. Or PUBG Mobile in this instance here. I had to do some research because I was immediately going to can this thing and put it into We Have a Team for this. However, there is one league for its just a specific community collegiate PUBG league. So compared to something like Pokemon Unite where you have nowhere to play it right now, like okay, it's not that far down, but you still just have one community league. There is basically no reason to make a team for a varsity program outside of that one little league. However, there is one outstanding metric that has not been touched on at all throughout this broadcast that I will bring up, and it goes directly towards PUBG. Of course, all my experience is in North America, and a lot of people who have come to North America for school have not necessarily any interest in the majority of our esports titles here. I don't know what it is, and personally, I'm going to use India as the example, but there are like multiple different cultures and countries that this kind of falls into as well. They seed the esports team, and they ask about PUBG. They don't care about the rest of the esports, but they ask about PUBG. So, in a funny, odd way, PUBG does kind of turn into the perfect community building esport that may actually be worth it for varsity programs to look into, to try and get another community and another demographic of people to get involved in the esports community at their school. Granted, the esports program has to actually acknowledge community, want it to grow, and actually like be a part of something and not just be a victory factory for this to work. But it may not necessarily hurt to bring PUBG, but in terms of like if I'm grading this directly the same as the rest of these, there is only one community league for it, and it is probably going to be forgotten. That does not necessarily mean, though, that you shouldn't make a team for it. Now, I realize I didn't put MLB in there with the rest of the sports games, but the exact same thing applies. That is going into We Have a Team for this because traditional sports is just generally not really supported. And same with our next one, Team Fight Tactics. From what I understand right now, there is only ECAC that supports it. There may be one more, but I cannot remember off the top of my head right now. All I know is I remember one of our players a long time ago won a Teamfight Tactics Championship for ECAC, and they barely even got a social media post. So We Have a Team for this is an appropriate location. Call of Duty, I just have a generic icon here for Call of Duty because COD has that awkward problem where their game actually changes in the middle of the semester. Like you'll start the game on one game, but then come November, they have to actually think about switching games or staying on the same game while other people are playing the new title. It's annoying as can be, but it is still rather popular. NECC has it, NACE has it, ECAC has it, and there is College COD. which is a community, but kind of similar to how CR6 is for Rainbow Six Siege. It's a rather prestigious community league. So, making a team for it, definitely valuable. Teams are only 4 players big, so it's actually really easy to make multiple teams for Call of Duty. The biggest pain is just logistically when the new game comes out. And each league handles it differently. I know, like NACE, for example, they will play all the way till the end of the season on the current or the old game. So if the game got changed in November, they would stay with the old one and then switch over after Christmas. But with that, Call of Duty, it is a core esport. I would put it there above League just because of the player base. It's still strong. COD is definitely a polarizing esport to say the least, but it is getting support in more and more places. It's got plenty of leagues, and you are going to probably find a place to play collegiate COD one way or another. That cannot be said about our final title here, Halo Infinite. While this thing started off with a bang and did have collegiate Halo, as well as I believe ECAC had some support for it before, it has since fallen off to the point where it only has collegiate Halo, and even then, I'm not even sure if they actually have a season going into 2025, 2026. So with that, hey, as much as I love Halo, it is going into the... we have a team for this category, and I do not recommend choosing this game as your go-to. With that being said, I am going to very, very quickly take myself and shrink myself a little bit lower so everybody can see the entirety of this tier list. So, in terms of like safety, if you are looking to try and get into college esports and you want to play either Rocket League, Valorant, Call of Duty, League of Legends, Overwatch, or Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, we can almost most certainly find you a place where you can actually compete. Places that do have scholarships even, or even if you're just kind of an upstart or like maybe just a slightly above average player but not necessarily pro, you can probably find an academy or a club team to compete in, because it's rather popular. Of course, League of Legends, Overwatch, and Smash do have to worry about declining player bases, but that doesn't necessarily have to be your problem right now, because if anything, that means that there's probably more spaces for you. Marvel Rivals up and coming. This could of course go one of two ways, where either the popularity is enough for pretty well every collegiate league to want to hop on it, or they are going to get kind of ousted and left in with the rest of the community leagues and get kind of put into overshadow territory. So it is risky to stay right now in Marvel Rivals, but the reward that you can get if it pops off could be incredible. You could be positioning yourself in a very, very good spot. Counter-Strike, iRacing, and Rainbow Six Siege, most varsity programs aren't going to necessarily say no to these teams, with the exception of maybe Counter-Strike because of the whole terrorist and counter-terrorist thing. But especially if you have your own equipment and whatnot, iRacing is just a single player or single person team, so they're probably not going to necessarily say no, but they're not going to reward you with much or promote you like really at all. And then Rainbow Six, you have enough places to play. And like Collegiate R6 is still of course fantastic, don't get me wrong. But they're probably not pumping many resources into you here. And you will be overshadowed by other esports titles. And of course we have a team for this, so that's just your Apex, Fortnite, Magic Arena, Hearthstone, all of the sports games, Super Smash Bros. Melee, any of your... Oh my goodness, my cat just knocked over the bottle. But FGC, Omega Strikers, Pokemon, PUBG, Teamfight Tactics, and Halo Infinite. While there may be one league for them, they don't necessarily have the support from any major collegiate leagues. Probably all community-based, and will very, very likely be falling off to the point where you're having a hard time finding a place to play. And if you do happen to find yourself on a varsity team for one of these games, your own director is probably going to forget about you. Alright, thank goodness that the water bottle was empty. But with that being said, that is my tier list. And we will begin closing things off here for tonight. This was a good talk, though. I definitely thank everybody for tuning in, watching it live. I do plan on breaking this down into a couple of different YouTube videos, maybe be a little bit more digestible. So if you happen to know somebody who's either interested in esports, or maybe you know someone who's a parent of a child that wants to get into esports, maybe once those videos are up, it could be something valuable. Would definitely love if you can share it and send them my way. Of course, if you also happen to have any questions about anything after the stream has completed, or right here while I'm just kind of rambling on, by all means, either put it into the comments or put it into the comment after the fact. And no worries, Gear. Thank you for stopping by. Definitely appreciate it. But yeah, so this will get trimmed out. I'm gonna be doing my next stream in a couple of days. It is going to be Tuesday. It's going to be the first time I'm going to attempt to try to play a game on stream, which is going to be Illuvium. Illuvium is a game that plays kind of similarly to Pokemon and Teamfight Tactics if it had a baby. And the main purpose for this, for me personally, is to, one, get some practice playing a game and streaming at the same time. I'm not going to be going super try-hard. I am going to be more so kind of commentating myself through the game, if that makes sense, while also testing to make sure that my computer can actually handle it. So it'll be a bit of an experiment, but it should be fun. I look forward to spending that night with you guys as well. And then Friday is still up in, or next Friday rather, is still going to be up in the air. Once I have that secured, you'll see a schedule post from me, once again, very similar to what I did last week. Yeah, no worries, Gear. Always all good. I'm just happy that you're able to pop by when you can. Of course, at the end of the day, this is not something, this isn't something mandatory. I'm just happy to hang out whenever you have the opportunity to hang out. So one more time as well, for anybody who's happened to have maybe discovered the channel over the last week or so. Of course, it has been a slow and steady growth, but the YouTube shorts have been making some progress. I know this channel is very, very close actually to getting over 10,000 views. Being able to get that within 1 week of getting back into the swing of things here is something that I'm very proud of, and I'm very thankful for all the guildmates that have tuned in and supported. So with that being said, we are just a little bit past 10:30 here, going on 10:40. So this shall be the time for me to close on up if there aren't any more questions from the Twitch chat. It looks like all is good. So thank you all once again for tuning in. I will be seeing you next Tuesday. on stream for a little bit of Illuvium, a little bit of gameplay, and then I'll let you know soon what's happening on Friday. Have a great night, everybody.